Grace Thornton stood on the boardwalk of Redemption, Texas, holding the last piece of bread she owned. She had walked 40 miles in 3 days to reach this town. Now, as she watched the ranch owner stride past without a glance, she knew this was her last chance. If he said no, she would have nowhere left to go. The afternoon sun beat down on Main Street, turning the dust into a shimmering haze. Grace's dress, once a respectable gray cotton, now hung on her frame like a scarecrow's rags. Her boots, held together with wire and determination, left uneven prints in the dirt. She carried a single carpet bag in her left hand and a cloth sack of cooking implements in her right. Everything she owned in the world. The stagecoach that had brought her from the last town pulled away in a cloud of dust, leaving her standing alone, exposed, vulnerable. The town seemed to pause and take notice. Conversations quieted. Eyes turned. Grace felt the weight of their judgment like stones pressing on her chest. She lifted her chin. 4 years of surviving alone had taught her one essential truth: the moment you show weakness, the world devours you. So she stood straight, shoulders back, and let them look. A woman emerged from the general store, her dress a cascade of blue silk that whispered money with every movement. She stopped on the steps, one gloved hand shading her eyes as she studied Grace. Behind her, 2 other women appeared, their faces pinched with curiosity and something darker. Contempt, perhaps, or satisfaction at seeing someone lower than themselves. Grace met their stares without flinching. She had learned to read people during her years of exile. These were women who measured worth by the fineness of fabric and the straightness of seams. They would be the first to condemn and the last to forgive. Grace committed their faces to memory. Know your enemies. That was another lesson the wilderness had taught her. The town of Redemption stretched along a single dirt road. On one side, a saloon with faded red paint and a crooked sign. Beside it, the general store with its false front and covered porch. Further down, a church with a white steeple that seemed to point accusingly at the sky. On the opposite side, a livery stable, a blacksmith's forge, sending up sparks, and at the far end, a marshal's office with iron bars on the windows. Grace noticed the marshal step out onto his porch. He was a thick man with a bull neck and small eyes that assessed her with the cold calculation of a predator. His hand rested on the gun at his hip. Not threatening, not yet, just reminding her that he held the power of law in this place. She turned away from his stare and approached the nearest person, an older man leaning against a hitching post. His face was weathered like old leather, his hands gnarled from decades of work. "Excuse me, sir." Grace kept her voice steady, polite. "Where might I find the Mercer Ranch?" The old man studied her for a long moment. His eyes were not unkind, but they held wariness. "About 5 miles northeast. Follow the main trail past the fork, then take the right path. You will know it by the gate. Iron arch with an M branded into it." "Thank you." Grace nodded and turned to go. "You looking for work?" The old man's question stopped her. "Yes." He glanced past her at the women still watching from the store steps. "Word of advice, miss. This town can be hard on strangers, especially women alone. You keep to yourself and do your work, you might do all right." Grace understood what he was not saying. The women on those steps would already be spinning stories about her, who she was, why she had come, what sins had driven her here. By nightfall, the entire town would have judged and convicted her without a single word spoken in her defense. "I will keep that in mind." She touched the brim of her hat in gratitude. Grace began walking. The weight of her bags cut into her hands, but she ignored the pain. 5 miles. She had walked further on worse days. The sun climbed higher, turning the sky into a bright, merciless blue. Sweat trickled down her spine. Her throat felt like sandpaper, but the canteen at her hip held only a few mouthfuls of water. She would save that for when she truly needed it. As she passed the church, a voice called out, sharp, female, imperious. "You there." "Woman." Grace stopped and turned. The woman in blue silk had descended from the store steps and now stood in front of the church. Up close, she was handsome rather than beautiful. Late 30s, perhaps. Her face had strong bones and intelligent eyes, but there was a hardness around her mouth that spoke of disappointment and bitterness carefully cultivated. "Yes, ma'am." Grace kept her tone neutral. "What brings you to Redemption?" "I am seeking employment." "Employment." The woman's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. "At the Mercer Ranch, I presume, if they will have me." "And what qualifications do you possess?" Grace felt the trap in the question. Any answer she gave would be judged and found wanting. "I can cook clean-tanned animals, mend clothes, and manage a household. I am honest, hard-working, and I do not gossip." The last part was a deliberate jab. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. "How refreshing! A paragon of virtue arrives in our humble town. Tell me, Miss—" "Thornton. Grace Thornton. Miss Thornton. Where do you come from, Missouri? And why did you leave Missouri?" Grace met the woman's stare directly. "Personal reasons, ma'am. Nothing that concerns anyone here. Everything concerns us here." The woman took a step closer. "We are a community of God-fearing Christians. We look after our own and protect ourselves from those who might bring shame or scandal to our town." "I have no intention of bringing anything but honest labor, ma'am." "We shall see." The woman smiled now, and it was a predator's expression. "I am Victoria Blackwood. I lead the Church Ladies' Auxiliary and sit on the town council. If you intend to remain in Redemption, you would do well to remember that nothing happens here without my knowledge and approval." Grace felt a familiar sensation in her gut, the cold, sinking awareness that she had made an enemy before she had even reached her destination. This woman, Victoria Blackwood, had just declared war. Subtle, civilized, but war nonetheless. "I will keep that in mind, Mrs. Blackwood." Grace turned to leave. "It is Miss Blackwood." Victoria's voice had ice in it now. "I am a widow. My late husband left me quite comfortably situated, I might add. I have no need to work with my hands." The implication hung in the air. Victoria was saying that she was better than Grace, that widowhood with money was superior to widowhood with nothing. That desperation was a moral failing. Grace walked away without responding. Behind her she heard Victoria's skirts rustle as the woman returned to her audience of church ladies. Whispers followed Grace down the street. She did not look back. The road out of town climbed gradually into rolling hills. The land here was different from Missouri. Drier, harsher. The grass grew in tough, stubborn clumps, and mesquite trees twisted themselves into tortured shapes. But there was a stark beauty to it, an honesty. This land did not pretend to be gentle. It demanded strength, or it killed you. Grace's feet found a rhythm, left, right, left, right. The bags grew heavier with each step. Her shoulders began to ache. Still she kept walking. She had survived 4 years alone in a mountain cabin with winter winds that could kill and wolves that circled her door. She had buried her husband and son with her own hands when the community that should have helped her turned their backs. She had learned to shoot, to trap, to endure. 5 miles was nothing. The sun reached its zenith and began its slow descent. Grace allowed herself 3 small sips of water. The trail forked exactly where the old man had said it would. She took the right path. Within half a mile she saw it. The iron arch spanning the road, the letter M branded into the metalwork. Mercer Ranch. Grace stopped to study what lay before her. The main house was larger than she had expected. 2 stories of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around the front and side. Smoke rose from a stone chimney. Behind the house, a barn big enough to hold 30 horses. Beyond that, corrals and outbuildings. In the distance, cattle grazed across hills that rolled toward the horizon. This was not just a ranch, this was an empire. Grace felt a moment of doubt. What business did she have here? What could she offer a man who owned all this? But then she remembered the bread in her bag, the single dress in her carpet bag, the 4 years of exile. She had nothing to lose because she had nothing left to lose. She walked through the arch and up the main road toward the house. Men were working in the corrals breaking horses. One of them noticed her and called to the others. Work stopped. 15 pairs of eyes turned to watch her approach. Grace kept walking. She could feel their assessment. She was used to it. A man emerged from the barn, older, perhaps 60. He wore leather chaps and a hat stained with sweat and dust. His face was lined from decades of sun, but his eyes were sharp. He walked toward Grace with the confident stride of someone who knew his worth and his place in the world. He stopped 10 feet away. "Help you, ma'am. I am here to see Mr. Mercer. He is in town. Should be back within the hour." "I will wait." The man studied her for a long moment. "You looking for work?" "Yes, sir." "What kind of work?" "Any kind that pays." "Name is Silas Walker. I am the foreman here." "Grace Thornton." Silas looked past her down the road toward town, then back at her. "You walk all the way from Redemption?" "Yes." "Hot day for walking." It was not a question, but Grace answered anyway. "I have walked in worse heat." Silas almost smiled. "Almost." He gestured toward the house. "You can wait on the porch. Shade there. Pump around the side if you need water." "Thank you, Mr. Walker. Just Silas will do." Grace climbed the porch steps and set down her bags. Her hands were red where the handles had cut into her palms. She flexed her fingers, working feeling back into them. The porch was indeed shady and the air slightly cooler. She found the pump where Silas had indicated and worked the handle until cold water gushed out. She drank deeply, letting it wash away the dust in her throat. When she returned to the porch, she noticed movement at one of the upstairs windows. A small face pressed against the glass. A child. A girl perhaps 6 or 7 years old. Dark hair, pale skin, enormous eyes that watched Grace with solemn intensity. Grace raised her hand in a small wave. The girl did not wave back. She simply stared, then disappeared from the window. Grace sat in one of the rocking chairs on the porch and allowed herself to close her eyes for just a moment. Exhaustion pulled at her like deep water. She had not slept properly in 3 nights. The stagecoach seats were hard, and sleep was dangerous when traveling alone. But now in this brief moment of quiet, she felt herself drifting. She jolted awake at the sound of hoofbeats. A horse and rider came through the arch at a trot. The man sat his horse like he had been born on one, tall, broad across the shoulders. He wore dark pants, a dusty shirt, and a black hat pulled low. As he drew closer, Grace could see his face. Strong jaw, weathered skin eyes that were a startling gray even from a distance. This was Cade Mercer. Grace knew it with absolute certainty. He had the bearing of a man who owned everything he surveyed and accepted it as his natural right. Cade dismounted in a single fluid motion. He handed the reins to a young ranch hand who appeared from the barn, then walked toward the house. He moved like a predator, controlled, efficient, dangerous. He reached the porch steps before he seemed to notice Grace sitting there. He stopped and looked at her. His face revealed nothing. Mr. Mercer. Grace stood smoothing her skirt automatically. "That is me. My name is Grace Thornton. I have come to ask for employment." Cade studied her for a long moment. His eyes took in her worn clothes, her dusty boots, her sun-darkened face. Grace felt exposed under that gaze, but she refused to look away. "I do not need help, Mrs. Thornton." "Miss." Grace corrected automatically, then regretted it. Admitting she was unmarried gave away vulnerability. "You walked from town." "Yes." "In this heat." Grace did not respond. It was obvious she had walked. Stating it again seemed pointless. Cade turned and called toward the barn. "Silas." The foreman appeared almost instantly. "Yes, boss." "Did you tell this woman I needed help?" "No, sir. She asked to wait for you. I said she could." Cade nodded and looked back at Grace. "What kind of work are you seeking?" "Any kind. I can cook clean tinned livestock, mend clothes. I have experience running a household. I have a housekeeper. Then perhaps your housekeeper needs assistance, or your cook, or your men need someone to do laundry." "Mr. Mercer, I am willing to work hard for fair wages. I do not drink, I do not steal, and I do not cause trouble." Why should I believe that? The question landed like a punch. Grace felt her face heat, but she kept her voice steady. "You should not. You should judge me by my work, not by my words." Something flickered in Cade's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. "Where are you from, Missouri? Why did you leave?" Grace had prepared herself for this question. She had spent 3 days in the stagecoach rehearsing her answer. Personal tragedy. "Mr. Mercer, I lost my family and found myself unable to remain, running from something, running to something. A new start. Cade was silent for a moment. Then he said, I lost my wife 3 years ago. My son too. Fever took them both while I was away on a cattle drive. The admission hung in the air between them. Grace understood what he was doing, testing her, seeing if she would offer false sympathy or platitudes. So she simply said, I am sorry for your loss. Why, you did not know them. I know the loss of loved ones. I would not wish that pain on anyone. Cade nodded slowly. He walked up the porch steps and stood close enough that Grace could see the fine lines around his eyes, the scar across his left knuckle, the hardness in his jaw that came from clenching teeth against grief. I have a daughter, he said. Emma. She is 7 years old. She needs someone who can cook proper meals, keep the house clean, and help care for her when I am working. My housekeeper Martha is getting old and needs help. The work is hard. The hours are long. I pay $18 a month plus room and board. Grace's heart leapt, but she kept her expression neutral. I would prefer $20. Cade's eyebrows rose. Why? Because I am worth it, Mr. Mercer, and because I have debts to pay. What kind of debts? Grace met his stare. That is my business, not yours. For a long, tense moment, neither spoke. Grace could feel her future balancing on the edge of a knife. Then Cade said, $18. If your work proves satisfactory after 1 month, I will increase it to 20. Grace extended her hand. Deal. Cade took her hand. His grip was firm, calloused warm. They shook once, then he released her. You start tomorrow at dawn. Silas will show you to the bunkhouse where Martha stays. There is an extra room there. Thank you, Mr. Mercer. One more thing, Miss Thornton. Cade's voice dropped lower. My daughter has been through enough pain. Do not get attached to her. Do not make promises you cannot keep. This is employment, nothing more. When you decide to move on, you move on. No drama, no tears. Do you understand? Grace felt the words like a slap. He was warning her, protecting his daughter from another loss. She could not fault him for that. I understand completely, Mr. Mercer. You need not worry about me causing your daughter any distress. Good. Cade turned and walked into the house, letting the screen door slam behind him. Grace stood alone on the porch, her heart pounding. She had done it. She had secured work. A place to stay. $18 a month. It was more than she had dared hope for. Silas appeared beside her, having approached so quietly she had not heard him. Come on. I will show you where you will be staying. Grace picked up her bags and followed him across the yard to a long, low building behind the main house. The bunkhouse. Silas opened the door and led her inside. The interior was dim and cool. Bunks lined both walls. At the far end, a separate door stood closed. Silas knocked. Martha, got someone for you to meet. The door opened and a woman emerged. She was perhaps 60, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her face was lined but strong, her eyes clear and assessing. She wore a simple dress and an apron stained with flour. This is Grace Thornton. Boss hired her to help you with the house and the girl. Martha looked Grace up and down. About time. I have been telling him for months I need help. Grace. Grace extended her hand. Martha shook it. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Martha Dawson. I run the house and cook for the family. You will help me with both. Can you actually cook, or did you just say that to get hired I can cook? We will see about that tomorrow. Come on, I will show you your room. Martha led Grace through her own quarters, which consisted of a small bedroom and a sitting area, then opened another door. This is yours. It is not much, but it is clean and the roof does not leak. The room was tiny. A narrow bed, a small table, a single chair, and a trunk at the foot of the bed. A window looked out toward the corrals. But to Grace, after 4 years of bare survival, it looked like luxury. It is perfect. Thank you. Supper is at 6. You will eat with me and the hands. Breakfast is at 5. Work starts at dawn. I will be ready. Martha studied her for a moment longer. Where are you from, girl? Missouri. What brought you to Texas? A need to leave Missouri. Martha grunted. Fair enough. I do not pry into people's pasts. But I will warn you, This town has a way of digging up secrets. You have any skeletons you are running from, they will find them." Grace set her bags on the bed. "Everyone has skeletons, Mrs. Dawson. I am no different. It is just Martha. And you are right, we all have our demons." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing. Mr. Mercer may seem hard, but he is a good man. His wife's death broke something in him. He does not let people close anymore. Do not take it personal. I won not." Martha left, closing the door behind her. Grace sat on the bed and felt it give slightly under her weight. The mattress was thin but serviceable. She opened her carpet bag and removed her few possessions. One change of clothes, a hairbrush, a small Bible that had belonged to her mother, and at the very bottom, wrapped in cloth, a photograph. Grace unwrapped it carefully. The image showed 3 people, a man, a woman, and a small boy. The man stood straight and proud, one hand on the boy's shoulder. The woman sat in a chair, her hands folded in her lap. All 3 looked directly at the camera with the solemn expressions common in photographs of that era. William, Samuel, and herself 4 years younger and a lifetime away. Grace touched the photograph gently. "I found work," she whispered. "I am going to be all right." But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. She would never be all right. The best she could hope for was survival, and perhaps, if she was very lucky, a few months of peace before her past caught up with her. Grace wrapped the photograph again and placed it in the trunk. She lay down on the bed, intending to rest for just a few minutes before supper. But exhaustion claimed her immediately, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to darkness and the sound of voices outside. For a moment, panic seized her. Where was she? What was happening? Then memory returned. The ranch. The job. She was safe. Grace sat up and struck a match to light the lamp on the table. The flame cast dancing shadows on the walls. Through the window she could see lanterns moving in the yard, men coming in from work. The smell of cooking drifted through the walls. Supper. Grace washed her face with water from the pitcher on the table, smoothed her hair, and went to find Martha. She found her in the main house kitchen, stirring an enormous pot over a wood stove. The kitchen was large and well equipped. Pots and pans hung from hooks on the walls. A long wooden table dominated the center of the room. "You are awake." "Good." Martha gestured to a pile of potatoes. "Peel those." Grace took up a knife and began peeling. Her hands moved automatically, the motions familiar and comforting. Martha worked in silence for several minutes, then said, 20 men for supper tonight. The boss and his daughter will eat in the dining room. We serve them first, then the hands. Understood. The girl does not talk much. Has not since her mother died. Do not take it personal if she ignores you." "I won't." Martha ladled stew into bowls while Grace finished the potatoes and put them on to boil. Working together, they prepared plates for Cade and Emma. Martha carried them into the dining room while Grace stayed in the kitchen. When Martha returned, she said, "The girl stared at you through the window earlier. First time she has shown interest in anything in months. I saw her. I waved, but she did not wave back. She will. Give her time." They served supper to the ranch hands in the bunkhouse dining area. The men ate with the focused intensity of people who worked hard and needed fuel. A few glanced at Grace with curiosity, but no one spoke to her. She was too new, too unknown. They would wait and judge her by her work. After supper, Grace helped Martha clean up. By the time they finished, it was nearly 8 o'clock. Grace's body ached from the long day, but it was a good ache, the ache of honest work. She returned to her room and found a small basket on her bed. Inside were a towel, a bar of soap, and a note in Martha's handwriting. "Bathhouse is behind the bunkhouse. Heat your own water." Grace smiled. Small kindnesses meant more than grand gestures. She took the basket and went to find the bathhouse. It was a small structure with a large copper tub and a stove for heating water. Grace filled the tub bucket by bucket from the pump, then lit a fire under the stove and waited for the water to heat. While she waited, she allowed herself to think about Cade Mercer. He was younger than she had expected, mid-30s perhaps, handsome in a hard-weathered way, but it was his eyes that stayed with her, gray as winter storm clouds and just as cold. Yet she had seen something flicker in them when he mentioned his wife and son. Pain, deep and still fresh despite 3 years having passed. Grace understood that pain. It was the kind that never fully healed. You simply learned to carry it. The water was finally hot. Grace stripped off her dusty clothes and lowered herself into the tub. The heat was almost painful at first, then became glorious. She scrubbed away 3 days of travel grime and 4 years of hardship. When she finally emerged, her skin was pink and her muscles loose. She dressed in her clean clothes and returned to her room. Through the window she could see lights in the main house, 2nd floor. That would be Emma's room, perhaps, or Cade's. Grace wondered what it was like up there. What memories haunted those rooms? A knock on her door startled her. She opened it to find Silas standing in the dim hallway. "Sorry to bother you, Miss Thornton, but I wanted to give you this before you hear it from someone else." He handed her a folded piece of paper. Grace opened it and felt her blood turn to ice. It was a handbill, the kind posted in towns across the West. Wanted for murder. Grace Thornton, last seen in Jefferson County, Missouri. Reward, $500. Contact, Marshal James Hawkins. Redemption, Texas. Grace's hands shook. Her vision blurred. This could not be happening. Not here, not now. "Where did you get this?" Her voice came out as a whisper. "Marshal Hawkins is putting them up around town tomorrow. I saw one tonight at the saloon. Figured you should know." Grace looked up at Silas. His face was neutral, but his eyes held something like sympathy. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I have known men and women on the run. Most of them were guilty of something, but a few were innocent and just did not have anyone to stand up for them." Silas paused. "I am not saying which one you are, but I figured you deserved a warning. Thank you." Grace's voice was barely audible. Silas tipped his hat and left. Grace closed the door and leaned against it, her heart hammered in her chest. $500. That was enough to bring every bounty hunter in Texas to her door. She looked at the handbill again. Marshal James Hawkins. Who was he? And how had he gotten this information? Grace had been careful. She had used different names, traveled at night, stayed away from towns. Yet somehow someone had found her. Victoria Blackwood. The realization hit Grace like a physical blow. Victoria had asked where she was from, Missouri. And now, within 3 days, a wanted poster appeared with her name on it. It was too fast to be coincidence. Grace sank onto her bed. She should run, pack her bag, and disappear into the night. But where would she go? She had no money, no horse, nowhere to hide. And even if she ran, the poster would follow her. $500 would make every sheriff and bounty hunter in the West her enemy. She thought of Cade Mercer's words, "Do not get attached. Do not make promises you cannot keep. This is employment, nothing more." He had been warning her, but also himself. He had been hurt too many times, lost too much. He would not defend her when the marshal came. Why should he? She was nothing to him, a stranger who had walked onto his ranch looking for work. Grace lay down on her bed, still fully clothed. Sleep was impossible. Her mind raced through possibilities. She could go to the marshal and explain, but explain what? That she had not murdered her husband. Who would believe her? She had fled Missouri rather than face accusations. That made her look guilty. She could go to Cade and ask for help. But he had already made it clear he wanted no complications. She would be putting him and his daughter at risk. Grace could not do that to them. No, she would have to face this alone, just as she had faced everything else. Grace closed her eyes and forced herself to breathe slowly, in through her nose, out through her mouth. She had survived 4 years. She could survive this. She had to. Outside her window, the ranch settled into night. The last lanterns were extinguished. The sounds of men and animals faded. In the distance, a coyote howled. Grace listened to it and thought, "I know how you feel." She must have slept eventually because she woke to the sound of a rooster crowing. Gray dawn light filtered through her window. Her body ached from tension and exhaustion, but she forced herself to rise. If this was to be her last day of freedom, she would work. She would earn her wages honestly, and she would face whatever came with her head held high. Grace dressed quickly and went to the kitchen. Martha was already there kneading dough for biscuits. "Morning?" Martha did not look up from her work. "Morning." Grace washed her hands at the sink. "What can I do?" "Make coffee, then start on the bacon. We feed the hands at 5:30. They worked in companionable silence. Grace made coffee strong and black the way ranch hands preferred it. She fried bacon in an enormous cast-iron skillet. The smell filled the kitchen, rich and savory. Martha finished the biscuits and slid them into the oven. When everything was ready, they carried the food to the bunkhouse dining area. The men filed in, sleepy-eyed and hungry. They filled their plates and ate quickly, needing to get to work. Grace was clearing plates when a small voice said, "You are the new lady." She turned to find Emma standing in the doorway. The girl wore a simple dress and her dark hair was braided. Her face was pale and serious. Too serious for a child. "I am." Grace knelt down to be at eye level. "My name is Grace. I am Emma. It is very nice to meet you, Emma." The girl studied Grace with unnerving intensity. Her eyes were the same gray as her father's. "Are you going to stay?" Grace's throat tightened. "I am going to try." "Everyone leaves." Emma's voice was matter-of-fact. "Mama left. The last housekeeper left. Even Papa leaves sometimes. I am sorry your mama left." Grace chose her words carefully. "But I do not think she wanted to. Sometimes people leave even when they do not want to. She died." Emma's eyes were dry, but her voice carried a world of pain. "Papa said she went to heaven. But I think heaven is just what people say when someone does not come back." Grace felt tears prick her own eyes. She blinked them away. "Your papa is right. Your mama is in heaven. And I bet she watches over you every single day. Do you think so? I know so. Because that is what mamas do. They never stop loving their children, even when they cannot be with them anymore." Emma stared at Grace for a long moment. Then without warning she stepped forward and wrapped her thin arms around Grace's neck. The hug was brief, almost desperate. Then Emma pulled back and ran from the room. Grace stayed kneeling on the floor, stunned. Martha appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "That child has not hugged anyone since her mother died. Not even her father." Grace stood slowly. "I did not mean to upset her." "You did not upset her. You gave her something she has been needing." Martha's voice was gruff but not unkind. "Hope." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of work. Grace helped Martha prepare breakfast for Cade and Emma. She cleaned the kitchen. She swept floors. She beat rugs. The work was endless, but Grace welcomed it. It kept her mind occupied. At noon, as she was hanging laundry to dry, a horse came through the ranch gate. The rider was a big man in a dark suit with a badge pinned to his chest. Marshal James Hawkins. Grace's stomach dropped. The marshal dismounted and walked toward the house. Cade met him on the porch. Grace could not hear their conversation, but she watched from behind the laundry. After several minutes, both men looked in her direction. Grace forced herself to keep working, hanging sheets, pinning them to the line. Her hands shook, but she did not stop. Footsteps approached. Grace turned to see Cade and the marshal walking toward her. She set down the basket of wet laundry and wiped her hands on her apron. "Miss Thornton." Cade's voice was neutral. "Marshal Hawkins would like to speak with you." "Ma'am." The marshal touched his hat. "I am Marshal James Hawkins. I need to ask you a few questions." "Of course." Grace kept her voice steady. "You are Grace Thornton from Missouri." "Yes." "Are you aware there is a warrant for your arrest?" "I am now." The marshal studied her. "You are wanted for the murder of your husband, William Thornton." "I did not murder my husband, Marshal. He died of fever. So did our son." "Can you prove that I have witnesses?" "A doctor who treated them. A preacher who performed the funeral. I can provide their names." "Why did you leave Missouri if you were innocent?" Grace met his stare. "Because no one believed I was innocent. Because I was tired of fighting accusations I could not disprove. Because I wanted to survive." "That sounds like running to me. Call it whatever you like. I did not kill my husband. I loved him. And I would give anything to have him and my son back." The marshal was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I am going to need you to come into town with me. We will hold you until we can verify your story." Grace's knees went weak. She glanced at Cade. His face was unreadable. "Marshal, may I ask a question?" Cade's voice was calm. "Go ahead. On what authority are you arresting Miss Thornton? I have a warrant from Missouri. May I see it?" The marshal reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. Cade took it and read carefully. Grace watched his face, trying to gauge his thoughts. Finally, Cade said, "This warrant is 4 years old. It is still valid. Is it 4 years is a long time for a warrant to remain active, especially for a case with no body, no weapon, and no witnesses?" The marshal's jaw tightened. "I do not see what concern this is of yours, Mr. Mercer. Miss Thornton is my employee. That makes it my concern. She is a murder suspect. She is a woman entitled to due process." Cade handed the warrant back. "If you want to arrest her, Marshal, you do it proper. Get a judge, have a hearing. Until then, she works for me and stays on my property." The marshal's face reddened. "You are interfering with the law. I am ensuring the law is followed correctly." Cade's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "And I am telling you that if you try to take this woman off my ranch without proper legal procedure, you will have a problem." The two men stared at each other. Grace held her breath. Finally, the marshal said, "Fine, I will get a judge. But she does not leave this ranch. You understand?" "Perfectly." The marshal mounted his horse and rode away. Grace released the breath she had been holding. Her legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the ground. Cade looked down at her. "Are you all right? Why did you do that?" Grace's voice shook. "You do not even know me. I know enough." Cade extended his hand to help her up. "I know you are a hard worker. I know my daughter likes you. And I know that warrant smells wrong." Grace took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. "Thank you. Do not thank me yet. The marshal will be back, and next time he will have legal backing. If you are innocent, you need to prove it fast. How contact whoever can vouch for you. Doctor, preacher, family. Get them to send statements. Better yet, get them to come here. They are in Missouri. That will take weeks. Then you better start writing letters today." Cade turned to go, then paused. "Miss Thornton, are you innocent?" Grace looked him in the eye. "Yes, Mr. Mercer, I swear it." "All right then. We will see this through." He walked away. Grace stood alone in the yard, surrounded by drying laundry and the weight of her past. For the first time in 4 years, someone had stood up for her. Someone had believed her without proof or promise. It was more than she had dared hope for. That evening, after the day's work was done, Grace sat at the small table in her room and wrote letters. To Dr. Morrison, who had treated William and Samuel. To Reverend Hayes, who had performed their funeral. To her sister-in-law, Rachel, who had witnessed everything. She explained where she was, what had happened, and begged them to help her. When she finished, she sealed the letters and addressed them. Tomorrow she would ask Silas to post them. Then she would wait and hope. Grace blew out her lamp and lay in the darkness. Through her window she could see stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. They were the same stars she had watched from her Missouri cabin, the same stars that had witnessed her grief and her survival. She thought of Cade's question, "Are you innocent?" Yes, she was innocent of murder, but guilty of so much else. Guilty of surviving when her family had died, guilty of running instead of fighting, guilty of being weak when she should have been strong. Grace closed her eyes and whispered into the darkness, "William, Samuel, I am still here. I am still fighting. Help me be strong enough." No answer came, but somewhere in the night a breeze rustled the curtains at her window. And for just a moment, Grace imagined she felt her husband's hand on her shoulder and her son's small arms around her waist. Then the moment passed, and she was alone again. But the memory of it sustained her. She would face the marshal. She would face the town. She would face whatever came next, because that was what survivors did. They endured. The letters were posted on Monday. By Wednesday, the entire town knew about Grace Thornton and the murder charge. By Friday, Cade Mercer had been summoned to appear before the town council. Grace learned this from Martha, who heard it from one of the ranch hands who had been in town for supplies. The council wanted answers. They wanted to know why Cade was harboring a suspected murderess. They wanted her removed from the ranch and placed in custody pending trial. Cade said nothing about the summons to Grace. He simply continued his work as if nothing had changed. He rose before dawn, worked until dark, and spoke only when necessary. But Grace noticed small things: the way his jaw tightened when riders approached the ranch, the way his hand rested on his gun when strangers appeared. He was preparing for a fight. Grace threw herself into work with desperate intensity. If these were to be her last days of freedom, she would earn them. She rose at 4 each morning and worked until her body screamed for rest. She cooked meals that made the ranch hands groan with satisfaction. She cleaned the main house until every surface gleamed. She mended clothes, tended the vegetable garden, and helped Martha with the endless tasks that kept a ranch running. Emma watched her constantly. The child appeared wherever Grace worked, silent and observant. At first, Grace tried to maintain the distance Cade had demanded, but Emma's loneliness was too profound to ignore. So Grace began talking to her as she worked. Nothing profound, just simple observations about the weather, the horses, the way bread dough felt beneath your hands. Emma never responded with more than a nod or a small smile, but she stayed close. And that, Grace realized, was its own form of conversation. On Thursday afternoon, Cade announced they would be taking 50 head of cattle to Fort Worth, a 3-day journey. They would leave Friday at dawn. Grace was scrubbing the kitchen floor when Martha delivered this news. "And the boss wants to know if you can cook on the trail." Martha's tone suggested she thought this was a terrible idea. "I can. It is hard work, girl, harder than anything you have done here. You will be cooking for 20 men over an open fire in all weather. You will sleep on the ground. You will ride all day. I have done worse." Martha studied her. "Have you really? Or are you just saying that?" Grace sat back on her heels and looked up at the older woman. "I spent 4 years alone in a mountain cabin in Missouri. I hunted my own food, chopped my own wood, and survived winters that killed grown men. I think I can manage a cattle drive." Martha grunted. "Fair enough. But do not say I did not warn you." That evening, Cade called Grace into his office. It was the first time she had been in this room. The space was masculine and spare, a desk covered with ledgers, shelves holding books on animal husbandry and land management. On one wall, a map of Texas with the ranch boundaries marked in red ink. On the desk, a framed photograph of a woman and child, Sarah and Emma. Grace tried not to stare at the photograph, but she could not help herself. Sarah had been beautiful. Delicate features, dark hair, a gentle smile. Everything Grace was not. "You wanted to see me?" Grace kept her voice neutral. Cade sat behind his desk, his face half in shadow from the single lamp. "The trail drive. Martha says you want to come. If you will have me." "Why?" Grace considered her answer carefully. "Because I can help. Because I need to prove my worth. Because sitting here waiting for the marshal to return will drive me mad." Cade studied her. "It will be difficult. I understand. The men will test you. They always do when a woman joins the crew. Let them test." Something that might have been approval flickered in Cade's eyes. "All right. You ride with the chuck wagon. Silas will show you what supplies to pack. You cook 3 meals a day for 20 men. You keep up or you ride back alone. Understood?" "Understood. One more thing." Cade leaned forward, his face coming into the light. "Why do you really want to come?" Grace met his stare. "Because Victoria Blackwood will be visiting the ranch while you are gone. She sent word yesterday requesting permission to call on Emma." "How do you know that Martha told me?" Grace paused. "I do not trust that woman, Mr. Mercer. And I do not want to be alone here when she comes." Cade's jaw tightened. "Victoria has no business with Emma, yet she is coming anyway." Grace kept her voice level. "I think she wants to use your absence to establish a relationship with your daughter, to position herself as a maternal figure in Emma's life." "Why would she do that?" Grace chose her words carefully. "Because she wants what you have, Mr. Mercer. This ranch, your position, your daughter. And she sees me as an obstacle. You think she is behind the wanted poster. I know she is. The timing is too convenient. I arrive in town, speak with her for 5 minutes, and by that same night a 4-year-old warrant suddenly appears. She must have telegraphed Missouri, found someone willing to create or resurrect that warrant, and arranged for Marshal Hawkins to receive it. That would require money and connections. Victoria Blackwood has both. Cade sat back in his chair. If you are right, she is more dangerous than I thought. She wants you to marry her. Grace said it bluntly. And she will destroy anyone who stands in her way. Silence fell between them. Then Cade said quietly, I will never marry Victoria Blackwood. I would rather sell this ranch and start over. Then you need to make that clear to her. Publicly. Before she does something you cannot undo, such as convincing the town that Emma would be better off with her, that you are unfit to raise a daughter alone, that a woman of her social standing could provide stability and maternal guidance. Cade's hands clenched on the desk. She would not dare. Would not she? Grace leaned forward. She has already demonstrated she is willing to fabricate legal documents. What is to stop her from fabricating evidence that you are a neglectful father, that Emma is being harmed by living with a murder suspect? The words hung in the air. Cade stood abruptly and walked to the window. His broad shoulders were tense, his hands fisted at his sides. You see things clearly, Miss Thornton. I have had 4 years to learn how the world works when you have no protection, Mr. Mercer. Power and money can twist any truth into any lie they choose. Cade turned to face her. If Victoria tries anything with Emma while I am gone, Martha has orders to send for me immediately. I will be back in less than a day. And if she does nothing overt, if she simply sits with Emma, brings her gifts, speaks kindly to her, that is harder to fight. Then I will deal with it when I return. Cade moved toward the door, signaling the conversation was over. Pack light. We leave at dawn. Grace stood and walked to the door. As she passed Cade, she said quietly, Thank you for letting me come. Do not thank me yet. The trail is unforgiving to those who cannot keep up. I will keep up. That night, Grace packed her few belongings into a canvas bag. Extra clothes, her mother's Bible, the photograph of William and Samuel wrapped carefully in cloth. She hesitated, then added William's old hunting knife. It was a good blade, well balanced. She might need it. She slept poorly, waking every hour to check the darkness outside her window. When the rooster finally crowed at 4:30, she rose with relief. Action was always better than waiting. The ranch yard was organized chaos. Men saddled horses, loaded the chuck wagon, checked equipment. The cattle had been gathered in the main corral, their lowing filling the air. Silas moved through the activity like a general commanding troops, his voice carrying orders that were instantly obeyed. Grace found Martha in the kitchen packing final supplies. Cornmeal flour, salt pork, coffee, dried beans. Martha worked with efficient speed, her movements practiced from decades of experience. 60 pounds of flour, Martha said without looking up. 40 pounds of beans. 20 pounds of coffee. Salt pork enough for 3 days. After that you will be hunting fresh meat, or the men will be eating beans and biscuits. Grace helped load the supplies into the chuck wagon. The wagon itself was a marvel of practical design. Storage compartments built into every available space. A hinged door that folded down to create a work surface. Hooks for pots and pans. A water barrel strapped to the side. You ever driven a team before Silas appeared beside her? No. Then you ride with Charlie. He handles the wagon. You just worry about cooking. Charlie turned out to be a grizzled man of 60 with tobacco-stained teeth and kind eyes. He helped Grace up onto the wagon seat and said, "Welcome aboard, miss. Try not to fall off. I will do my best." The sun was just touching the horizon when Cade rode to the front of the assembled group. He sat his horse with unconscious grace, his body moving with the animal as if they were one creature. He looked over his men, counting silently, then nodded to Silas. "Move them out." The cattle drive began with a bellow and a surge of movement. 20 riders spread out around the herd, guiding the cattle toward the gate. The chuck wagon fell in behind wheels, creaking pots clanging against each other, despite Charlie's best efforts to secure them. Grace looked back once. Emma stood on the porch of the main house, Martha beside her. The child raised one small hand in farewell. Grace waved back her throat tight. Then they passed through the gate, and the ranch disappeared behind a rise of land. The first day was brutal. The sun climbed high and hot, turning the sky white with heat. Dust rose from the cattle in choking clouds, coating everything and everyone. The wagon jolted over rough ground, rattling Grace's teeth and bruising her backside despite the cushion she sat on. But Grace did not complain. She watched the land roll past. She studied how Charlie handled the team, how he anticipated rough patches and adjusted the wagon's path. She noted where the riders positioned themselves around the herd, how they communicated with whistles and hand signals. At noon, Silas called a brief halt. The cattle grazed while the men dismounted to stretch and water their horses. Grace climbed down from the wagon and began unpacking supplies for the midday meal. She worked quickly, building a small fire, heating beans and salt pork in a cast-iron pot. She made coffee strong enough to strip paint and sliced thick pieces of cornbread Martha had baked that morning. It was simple food, but there was plenty of it. The men filled their plates and ate standing, too tired to sit. One of them, a young cowboy with red hair and a cocky smile, approached Grace. "Name's Daniel Riley, ma'am. That is some good grub." "Thank you, Mr. Riley." "Just Daniel. We do not stand on formality out here." He studied her openly. "You do not look like much, if you do not mind me saying, but you can cook. I will take that as a compliment." It was meant as one. Daniel grinned. "Most women cannot hack it on a trail drive. Too soft. But you seem like you got sand. I have survived worse than this." "Have you?" Now Daniel's tone suggested he did not believe her. "Well, we will see. Trail gets harder from here." Grace met his challenge with a level stare. "Then I suppose we will both find out what I am made of." Daniel laughed and walked away. But Grace noticed several other men had been listening. They exchanged glances. Testing her was going to be a group activity. They rode until twilight, covering 15 miles. When Silas finally called halt for the night, Grace was so stiff she could barely climb down from the wagon. But she forced herself to move to start the evening fire to begin preparing supper. Charlie helped her. He showed her how to arrange rocks for wind protection, how to hang the Dutch oven over coals for even heating. Grace absorbed everything, filing it away for future use. She made stew with salt pork beans and wild onions Charlie had gathered during a brief stop. She baked biscuits in the Dutch oven and made another pot of coffee. By the time she called the men to eat, she was swaying with exhaustion. Cade was the last to approach the fire. He had been riding point all day, keeping the herd moving in the right direction. Dust coated his face and clothes. His eyes were red-rimmed from squinting into the sun. "How are you holding up?" He accepted a plate from Grace. "Well enough. That was quite a ride for your first day." It was adequate. Cade almost smiled. "Adequate. Most women would be crying by now." "I am not most women, Mr. Mercer." "No." His gray eyes studied her in the firelight. "You certainly are not." After the men had eaten and settled for the night, Grace cleaned the dishes with sand and water, scrubbing each pot and pan until they gleamed. Then she spread her bedroll near the wagon, wrapped herself in a blanket, and lay staring up at the stars. The ground was hard. The night air was cold. Somewhere in the darkness, coyotes howled. But Grace felt more at peace than she had in weeks. Out here there were no pretenses, no social hierarchies, just work and survival. She understood this world. She was nearly asleep when she heard footsteps. She opened her eyes to see Cade standing a few feet away, a blanket draped over his arm. "Gets cold at night." He dropped the blanket beside her. "Extra in case you need it." "Thank you." He started to walk away, then paused. "Miss Thornton, you did well today." Grace sat up. "Why does that surprise you?" "It does not." Cade's voice was quiet. "But it impresses me. There is a difference." He walked back to his own bedroll before Grace could respond. She lay back down, pulling the extra blanket over herself. It smelled of wood smoke and leather and something uniquely Cade. She breathed it in and felt for the first time in 4 years not quite so alone. The second day was harder. Her muscles screamed from yesterday's ride. Her hands were blistered from the rough work. But Grace ignored the pain and climbed back onto the wagon. They made good time covering another 15 miles by mid-afternoon. The landscape changed as they traveled, becoming more rugged. Hills gave way to rocky canyons and dry creek beds. The temperature climbed into the 90s. Grace prepared the noon meal in the shade of a massive cottonwood tree. As the men ate, she noticed a rider approaching from the east, a stranger. The men noticed too. Conversation died. Hands moved closer to guns. Silas rode out to meet the stranger. They spoke for several minutes, then Silas gestured for the man to approach the camp. As he drew closer, Grace saw he was young, perhaps 25, with nervous eyes and a gun worn low on his hip. "Says his name is Dalton Kane," Silas announced. "Claims he is looking for work. Said he heard we might need an extra hand." Cade stood and walked toward Kane. "We are not hiring." Kane smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "I was not really asking for work, Mr. Mercer. I was sent to deliver a message." "From whom?" "From interested parties." Kane's hand rested on his gun. "They would like to make you an offer for your ranch, $5,000. Fair price." "Not interested." "That is disappointing." Kane looked around at the assembled men. "See, the thing is, these interested parties are not really asking. They are telling. You sell or things get difficult." "Is that a threat?" Kane shrugged. "Call it what you like. You have 1 week to consider. After that, well, accidents happen. Cattle get stolen, barns burn, people get hurt." Cade's hand moved to his rifle. His voice dropped to ice. "You tell your employer that if anyone touches my ranch, my cattle, or my family, there won't be enough left of them to bury. Now get off my land before I decide you're trespassing with intent to harm." The air crackled with tension. Every ranch hand stood now ready to draw, but they were outnumbered by Kane and 4 other men who appeared from the rocks above the canyon. Kane smiled again. "Just wanted to make sure you understood the situation, Mr. Mercer. 1 week. He turned his horse and rode away, his companions following. No one moved until they disappeared over the ridge. Silas spat into the dirt. That was interesting. The air crackled with tension. Every ranch hand stood now ready to draw, but they were outnumbered by Kane and 4 other men who appeared from the rocks above the canyon. Kane smiled again. "Just wanted to make sure you understood the situation, Mr. Mercer. 1 week. He turned his horse and rode away, his companions following. No one moved until they disappeared over the ridge. Silas spat into the dirt. That was interesting. As they prepared to leave, Grace approached Cade. Who were those men? Hired guns. Cade checked his rifle. "Someone wants my ranch badly enough to threaten violence for it." "Victoria Blackwood." Cade met her eyes. "Maybe. Or maybe someone else. Land-hungry ranchers are common in Texas. But the timing is suspicious." They rode through the afternoon in tense silence. Every man scanned the surrounding terrain, watching for another ambush. But none came. As evening approached, Silas led them to a sheltered canyon with good grass and water. Grace set up camp while the men tended the cattle. She was building the fire when Emma's face suddenly filled her mind. The child alone at the ranch with only Martha for protection. If Victoria was behind the threats, what else might she do, Mr. Mercer? Grace found Cade unsaddling his horse. "Emma." Cade's hands stilled on the saddle. "What about her? If these men are willing to threaten you here, what is to stop them from going to the ranch?" "Martha is there. And 2 hands I left to guard the property." Against how many? Cade's jaw clenched. "I will send a rider back tonight. Tell them to be on alert. That might not be enough." "What do you suggest?" Grace took a breath. "Let me go back. I can ride through the night, reach the ranch by dawn. Add another pair of eyes, another gun. You are needed here to cook. Any of these men can heat beans and make coffee, but Emma needs someone who will protect her with their life." Grace met his stare. "And we both know Victoria's real target is not you, Mr. Mercer. It is your daughter. Control Emma, and she controls you." Cade was silent for a long moment. Then he called out Daniel. The young cowboy jogged over. "Sir, you are taking Miss Thornton back to the ranch. Tonight. Both of you ride armed and ride fast." Daniel's eyebrows rose. "Sir, that is an order." "Yes, sir." Daniel looked at Grace with new respect. "Can you ride, ma'am, well enough? Then we leave in an hour, soon as the horses rest." Grace returned to the chuck wagon and gathered her belongings. Charlie watched her pack with sad eyes. "You are a good cook, Miss Grace. Best we have had on a drive in years." "Thank you, Charlie." Grace smiled. "But I think I am needed elsewhere. That girl back at the ranch, she is lucky to have someone willing to fight for her. I am not fighting for her." Grace picked up her bag. "I am fighting with her. There is a difference." An hour later, Grace sat on a borrowed horse, her bag tied behind the saddle, William's knife strapped to her belt. Daniel checked his rifle and revolver, then nodded to Cade. "We will have her back safe, boss. See that you do." Cade looked up at Grace. "Thank you for doing this. I have not done anything yet. You left the safety of the group to ride into potential danger. That is enough." Cade paused. "Be careful." Grace wanted to say something meaningful, something that would capture the strange connection growing between them, but Daniel was already turning his horse toward the trail, so she simply nodded and followed. They rode through the night under a half-moon. The landscape was silver and shadow beautiful and treacherous. Daniel set a fast pace, but not reckless. He was young, but he knew his work. Around midnight they stopped to rest the horses and drink from their canteens. Daniel studied Grace in the moonlight. "You are not what I expected when I heard the boss hired a woman. What did you expect? Someone soft. Someone who would complain and cry and make everything harder." He grinned. "But you got grit, Miss Grace. I will give you that. High praise from a cowboy." Daniel laughed. "You know the boys were saying you are wanted for murder back in Missouri. That true?" "Yes." "Did you do it?" Grace met his eyes. "What do you think Daniel considered?" "I think if you killed someone, they probably deserved it." He stood and gathered the reins. "Come on, we got another 15 miles before dawn." They reached the ranch as the sun touched the horizon. The gate stood open, which was wrong. Martha always closed it at night. Grace's heart began to pound. Daniel drew his rifle. "Stay behind me." They rode through the gate at a trot. The ranch yard was quiet. Too quiet. No smoke from the kitchen chimney. No sounds of morning work beginning. Daniel gestured for Grace to stop, then dismounted and moved toward the main house on foot. Grace followed, knife in hand. Daniel tried the front door. Locked. He moved around the side, Grace right behind him. They found Martha on the back porch, tied to a chair, a gag in her mouth. Daniel cut her free while Grace removed the gag. Martha gasped and coughed. "Emma." Martha croaked. They took Emma. Grace's blood turned to ice. "Who Victoria Blackwood and that marshal? They came last night with papers. Said they had a court order giving Victoria temporary custody. Said you murdered someone and the boss was harboring a criminal and Emma was in danger. Where are the hands I left?" Daniel's face was grim. "Knocked out. Locked in the barn." Grace was already running toward the barn. She found the two ranch hands tied and dazed but alive. Daniel freed them while Grace ran back to Martha. "How long ago?" 2 hours, maybe." They took the road toward town. Grace ran to her horse and swung into the saddle. Daniel grabbed her reins. "Wait. We cannot just charge into town. They have the marshal and the law on their side. Then we make new law." Grace jerked the reins free. "That child is terrified. She is with a woman she does not trust and a corrupt marshal who helped fabricate charges against me. Every minute we wait is another minute Emma thinks she has been abandoned." Daniel hesitated, then made his decision. "All right. But we do this smart. We get help. From whom my father owns the ranch next to this one. He has got 30 men, and he owes Cade Mercer his life. We ride there first, gather a force, then we go to town with enough backing that even a corrupt marshal will think twice. How long will that take?" "An hour there, 30 minutes to explain. Then we ride to town, 2 hours total. Emma might not have 2 hours. She has got no choice." Daniel's young face was set. "Neither do we. One woman and one cowboy against a town. That is suicide, not rescue." Grace wanted to argue. Every instinct screamed at her to ride immediately, but Daniel was right. Charging in without a plan would get them both killed and would not save Emma. "All right, we go to your father, but we ride fast." They thundered out of the ranch yard, leaving Martha to free the remaining hands and secure the property. The sun climbed higher as they raced across open country. Grace pushed her horse hard, harder than she should have. But the image of Emma's face, frightened and abandoned, drove her forward. Daniel's family ranch appeared over a rise. It was smaller than Mercer Ranch, but well maintained. Daniel rode straight to the main house and dismounted at a run. "Pa," he burst through the front door. "Pa, I need help." A man emerged from the back of the house. He was an older version of Daniel with gray hair and a weathered face. He took one look at his son's expression and said, "What happened?" "They took Emma Mercer. Victoria Blackwood got some fake court order and the marshal helped her. Mr. Mercer is on a cattle drive. We need men to get her back." Daniel's father did not hesitate. "Jake," he called out. "Samuel, get everyone who can ride. Tell them to come armed." Within 20 minutes they had assembled 25 men. Daniel quickly explained the situation. When he mentioned Victoria Blackwood's name, several men spat into the dirt. "That woman has been a plague on this county for years," one man growled. "About time someone called her out." Daniel's father mounted his horse. "We ride to town. We surround the marshal's office. We demand he show us his legal authority to take that child. If he can produce legitimate papers, we argue in court. If he cannot, we take Emma back by force. Everyone clear?" The men nodded. Grace felt a surge of gratitude. These were Texans. They might be rough and hard, but they understood honor, and they protected children, even children who were not their own. They rode to redemption in a column that stretched 100 yards. Dust rose behind them like a declaration of war. As they entered the town, people stopped to stare. Women grabbed their children. Shopkeepers stepped out to watch. Word spread fast. Daniel led them straight to the marshal's office. The building was small and squat, built of adobe with barred windows. The door was closed. Daniel dismounted and pounded on the door. "Marshal Hawkins, open up." No response. Daniel pounded again. "I know you are in there. We are here for Emma Mercer." The door opened a crack. Marshal Hawkins peered out, his face pale. "I do not know what you think you are doing, boy, but you are interfering with the law. Show me your legal authority for taking that child. I do not have to show you anything." "Then you got no legal authority." Daniel's voice carried across the square. Everyone heard. "You kidnapped that girl on behalf of Victoria Blackwood. That is a crime, Marshal. You know it, and we know it." A crowd had gathered. Townspeople filled the square, drawn by the commotion. Grace saw Victoria Blackwood emerge from the church, her face tight with anger. "Enough!" Victoria's voice cut through the noise. "I have done nothing illegal. I have a court order signed by Judge Anderson giving me temporary custody of Emma Mercer pending a hearing on her father's fitness as a parent." "Then show us the order," Daniel's father called out. Victoria hesitated just for a moment. Then she produced a folded document. "Here, signed and sealed." Daniel took the document and read it. His face darkened. "This is dated yesterday. Judge Anderson is in Austin. There is no way he could have signed this and had it delivered here in less than a day." The crowd murmured. Victoria's face reddened. "The judge signed it last week. It was only just delivered." Daniel handed the paper to his father, who examined it closely. "This seal looks wrong, and this signature does not match Anderson's hand. I have seen his signature dozens of times. You are calling me a liar. I am calling you a forger." Daniel's father faced the crowd. "Victoria Blackwood fabricated this document to steal Emma Mercer. She is using a corrupt marshal to enforce illegal papers. That is kidnapping." The crowd's murmur grew louder. Angry, Grace saw the tide turning against Victoria. But the woman was not finished. Victoria turned to the marshal. "These men are threatening an officer of the law. Arrest them." Hawkins looked at the crowd, then at the armed men surrounding his office. He made a calculation. He was outnumbered and outgunned. Arresting anyone now would start a war he could not win. "I think we should wait for Judge Anderson to arrive and settle this proper," he said carefully. "A coward's answer." Daniel's father dismounted and walked to the door. "Where is the girl inside?" "Safe." "Then let us see her. If she is safe and unharmed, we will wait for the judge. If she is not, you will answer for it." Hawkins opened the door wider. The crowd surged forward. Daniel's father gestured for Grace to follow him inside. The marshal's office was dim and cramped. A desk, 2 chairs, a gun rack on the wall. A door at the back led to the cells. Hawkins unlocked it and led them through. Emma sat on a narrow cot in the first cell. Her face was streaked with tears, her small body rigid with fear. When she saw Grace, she leaped up and ran to the bars. "Grace." The child's voice broke. "Grace, please. I want Papa. I want to go home." Grace knelt by the bars and reached through to take Emma's hands. "I know, sweetheart. I know. We are going to take you home. Unlock this cell." Daniel's father's voice was ice. Hawkins fumbled with his keys and swung the door open. Emma ran to Grace, who caught her and held her tight. The child sobbed against Grace's shoulder, her small body shaking. "You are safe now." Grace stroked Emma's hair. "I have got you. No one is going to take you away." They emerged from the marshal's office into the bright sunlight. The crowd had swelled. 50 people now, maybe more. Victoria stood on the church steps, her face a mask of fury and fear. "This is illegal," she shouted. "That child belongs with me." "No!" Grace's voice rang out clear and strong. "This child belongs with her father, and anyone who tries to take her again will have to go through me. And me." Daniel stepped beside Grace. "And me." His father moved to her other side. One by one, the armed men formed a line between Emma and Victoria. Then others joined. Townspeople Grace had never met. Shopkeepers, farmers, women with children of their own. They created a wall of bodies protecting the child. Victoria looked at the crowd and realized she had lost. Her face twisted with rage. "This is not over," she hissed. "I will have that ranch. I will have everything." She spun and stalked away, her skirts whipping around her legs. Marshal Hawkins stood in his doorway, uncertain what to do. Daniel's father turned to him. "I suggest you start looking for a new job, Marshal, because when Mr. Mercer returns and learns what you did, your badge will not protect you." The crowd dispersed slowly. People came up to Grace, introduced themselves, offered support. The cafe owner, Rebecca Foster, appeared with a basket of food. For the child. She pressed it into Grace's hands. "And for you. You did a brave thing today." "I just did what was right." Rebecca smiled. "That is what brave means, dear." Grace carried Emma to the borrowed horse. Daniel helped them both up, then mounted his own horse. They rode back to Mercer Ranch, surrounded by an escort of armed men who would not leave until Cade returned. At the ranch, Martha had prepared Emma's room. The child was bathed, fed, and put to bed, but she would not let go of Grace's hand. "Stay." Emma's eyes were huge. "Please stay. I am scared. I am staying right here." Grace settled into a chair beside the bed. "I promise. What if they come back?" "They won't." Grace smoothed Emma's hair. "Too many people know now. Too many people saw what Victoria did. She cannot try again without everyone in the county knowing she is a kidnapper. But what if they hurt Papa?" Grace felt a chill. She had been so focused on rescuing Emma that she had not considered the bigger picture. Kane and his men had threatened Cade. Victoria had tried to steal Emma. These were coordinated attacks designed to destroy Cade's life piece by piece. "We need to warn him." Grace stood. "Martha, stay with Emma." She found Daniel outside. "We need to send riders to find Mr. Mercer. Warn him about Kane." "Already done. Pa sent 4 men an hour ago. They will catch up to the cattle drive by morning." "Good." Grace looked toward the horizon where the sun was setting. "Then we wait." The summons arrived the next morning, all 4 of them. And behind them, moving at a fast trot, came Cade Mercer and his entire crew. They had left the cattle with drovers and ridden back at a pace that had nearly killed the horses. Cade dismounted before his horse fully stopped. Emma ran from the porch, and he caught her, swinging her up into his arms. The child burst into tears, clinging to her father's neck. "I thought they took you away forever," Emma sobbed. "I thought you left me like Mama did." "Never." Cade's voice was rough. "I will never leave you. Never." He carried her into the house, still holding her tight. Grace stood on the porch and watched them go. She felt a strange emptiness. Her part was done. She had protected Emma. Now Cade was home and Grace was no longer needed. She turned to go back to her room, but Silas stopped her. "Boss wants to see you. In his office. In an hour." Grace nodded and went to wash and change. When she knocked on Cade's office door an hour later, her heart was pounding. "Come in." Cade stood by the window, his back to her. He still wore his dusty trail clothes. His shoulders were tense. "Mr. Mercer." Grace closed the door behind her. "I heard what you did." Cade's voice was quiet. "You risked your life to save Emma. I did what anyone would have done." "No." Cade turned to face her. His eyes were red, whether from exhaustion or emotion she could not tell. "You did what a mother would do. You protected my daughter when I could not." Grace's throat tightened. "She is a good child. She deserves to be safe." Cade walked toward her until they stood only a few feet apart. "You were right. About Victoria. About everything. She is after the ranch, and she will use Emma to get it. What will you do?" "First, I am going to get that marshal removed from office. He helped kidnap a child. That is a crime regardless of whose pocket he is in. Then I am going to make it very clear to Victoria Blackwood that if she ever comes near my daughter again, she will regret it. And Kane is a hired gun. Without money to pay him, he will move on. The real enemy is Victoria. Cut off the head, and the body dies." Grace nodded. "Then you have a plan." "I have a plan." Cade paused. "Miss Thornton." "Grace, I need to ask you something." "Yes." "Why did you come back? You were safer on the trail. Coming back put you in danger from both Victoria and the marshal. You could have been arrested. Why risk that?" Grace met his eyes. "Because Emma needed someone. And because—" She stopped searching for the right words. "Because I know what it is like to be alone and afraid. I could not let her feel that way if I could prevent it." Cade was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "The letters you sent to Missouri, have you received any response?" "Not yet. It has only been 2 weeks. It will take time. What if they do not respond? What if they cannot help? Then I will face whatever comes. You might hang for a crime you did not commit." Grace felt the weight of that truth. "I know. I will not let that happen." The words hit Grace like a physical force. She stared at Cade. "Why would you risk yourself for me? Because you risked yourself for Emma. Because you are innocent. Because—" Cade stopped, jaw tightening. "Because this ranch, this county needs more people like you and fewer people like Victoria Blackwood. That is not enough reason to put yourself in danger. Maybe not. But it is my reason." Cade moved closer. "I have been dead inside for 3 years, Grace, going through the motions. Working, eating, sleeping, but not really living. And then you walked onto my ranch, and everything changed. Mr. Mercer." "Cade. My name is Cade." Grace's heart hammered. "Cade, I am still accused of murder. I am still facing trial. I am not free to—" "I know. I am not asking for anything. I am just telling you the truth. You matter. To Emma. To this ranch. To me. And I will do whatever it takes to keep you safe." Grace wanted to say so many things, that she felt the same pull toward him, that every time he looked at her something inside her came alive again, that the thought of building a life here with him and Emma was the first dream she had allowed herself in 4 years. But she could not say any of it, not with a noose still hanging over her future, so she simply said, "Thank you." Cade nodded. He stepped back, restoring proper distance. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we go into town and deal with Victoria once and for all." Grace left the office and walked back to her room. Her mind spun with everything that had happened. Victoria's attack, Emma's kidnapping, the town rallying to their defense, Cade's words, "You matter." Grace sat on her bed and pulled out the photograph of William and Samuel. She looked at their faces frozen forever in that moment of posed happiness. "I think I might be falling in love with him," she whispered. "Is that wrong? Am I betraying you?" No answer came, but as Grace lay down to sleep, she imagined William's voice in her mind. "Live, Grace. That is all I ever wanted for you. live. And for the first time she thought she might actually be able to do that. The summons came 3 days later. Judge Harrison Morrison would arrive in Redemption on Friday to hear the case against Grace Thornton. The charge was murder. The penalty if convicted was death by hanging. Grace received the news with outward calm. Inside terror clawed at her chest. She had sent letters. She had hoped for responses. But hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. The trial would proceed with or without witnesses to defend her. Cade read the summons in his office, his face carved from stone. Then we prepare. How does one prepare for a trial when the deck is already stacked by stacking it back in our favor? Cade stood and moved to his desk. He pulled out a ledger and began writing. We need character witnesses, people who can testify to your integrity, your work, your character. Who would do that? I have been here less than a month, more people than you think. Cade continued writing. Martha, Silas, Daniel and his father, Rebecca Foster from the cafe. Half the people who stood up for Emma are willing to stand up for you. Victoria will paint them all as friends protecting a criminal. Then we bring in people who do not know you. Cade looked up. The traveling preacher who passed through last week. He spoke with you for an hour about Scripture. The doctor who treated your blistered hands after the trail drive. The merchant who sold you fabric and remarked on your honest dealings. Grace felt a flicker of hope. You have been gathering evidence. I told you. I will not let you hang for something you did not do. Cade's gray eyes held hers. But we need more than character witnesses. We need proof from Missouri. The letters have had 3 weeks to reach their destinations. Responses could arrive any day, but we cannot count on that. Cade tapped his pen on the desk. So we go on the offensive. How we prove Victoria Blackwood fabricated the warrant. We show the judge that she has been conspiring with Marshall Hawkins to destroy both of us. We turn the trial from your defense into her prosecution. That is risky. Everything worth doing is risky. Cade stood. Tomorrow we ride to the county seat. There are records there, legal documents, paper trails. If Victoria bribed Hawkins, if she forged documents, if she pulled strings to resurrect a dead warrant, there will be evidence. What if there is not? Then we fight anyway. Cade's voice was steel. Because that is what you do when your back is against the wall. You fight. That night Grace could not sleep. She lay in her narrow bed and watched moonlight paint shadows on the walls. In 2 days, she would stand before a judge and argue for her life. The irony was not lost on her. 4 years ago, she had wanted to die, had begged God to take her. Now, facing that very real possibility, she discovered she wanted desperately to live. She thought of Emma sleeping peacefully in the main house. The child had recovered quickly from her ordeal, resilient in the way only children can be. But she stayed close to Grace now, as if afraid Grace might disappear if she looked away too long. Grace thought of Cade, his quiet strength, his unexpected protection. She thought of the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not watching, like he was seeing something he had lost and found again. She thought of this ranch, this harsh and beautiful land, these hard and honest people. Somewhere in the past month, Texas had stopped being a hiding place and had become home. Grace closed her eyes and prayed, not for deliverance, not for miracles, just for strength. Whatever came, she would face it standing. Morning arrived cold and clear. Grace dressed in her best clothes, a simple gray dress Martha had helped her mend and press. She braided her hair and pinned it up. Looking in the small mirror, she saw a different woman than the one who had arrived a month ago. That woman had been desperate and broken. This woman was still afraid, but no longer defeated. Cade was waiting in the yard with 2 horses saddled. He had shaved and wore a clean shirt and his good hat. He looked every inch the successful rancher, a man of substance and respect. Ready. His voice was gentle, as I will ever be. They rode toward the county seat, a larger town 20 miles south. The journey took most of the morning. They spoke little, but the silence was companionable rather than awkward. Grace found herself acutely aware of Cade beside her, the way he sat his horse, the occasional glance he sent her way, the protectiveness in his bearing. The county seat was called Anderson, named after the judge who now resided there. It was bigger than Redemption, with actual streets and a courthouse built of stone. Cade led them directly to the courthouse and the records office in the basement. A clerk looked up from his desk as they entered. "Help you?" "We need to see records of telegrams sent and received in the past month, specifically any communication between Redemption and Missouri." The clerk frowned. "That is private communication. Not when it involves forgery and conspiracy." Cade's voice hardened. "My name is Cade Mercer. I own Mercer Ranch. This woman has been falsely accused of murder by parties in Redemption who fabricated legal documents. I want to see proof." The clerk hesitated. Then he said I would need authorization from Judge Morrison. "Then get it. We will wait." The clerk disappeared into a back room. 20 minutes later, Judge Morrison himself appeared, his presence filling the small office. "Mr. Mercer, I know of you by reputation." Judge Morrison extended his hand. "Thank you, Your Honor." Cade shook his hand. "This is Grace Thornton, the accused murderess." Judge Morrison studied Grace. "You do not look like a killer, Miss Thornton." "I am not one, Your Honor. We shall see." The judge turned to the clerk. "Show them the telegram records for the past month. Any communications between Redemption and Points East." The clerk produced a large ledger. Cade opened it and began reading, his finger tracing down the columns of dates and messages. Grace watched his face, trying to read his expression. Then he stopped. "Here." Cade pointed to an entry. 3 weeks ago, a telegram from Victoria Blackwood in Redemption to a Judge Samuel Hayes in Kansas City, Missouri. It reads, "Need legal assistance regarding old warrant. Woman named Grace Thornton wanted for murder of husband William Thornton, 1864. Urgent. Will pay for information and documentation." Judge Morrison leaned in to read, and the response, Cade turned the page. 2 days later. "From Hayes to Blackwood. Have located warrant. Can resurrect and forward for fee of $500. Advise if interested." Judge Morrison's face darkened. "That is bribery and conspiracy. There is more." Cade continued reading. Blackwood's response. "Agreed. Send warrant to Marshal James Hawkins, Redemption, Texas. Payment to follow upon receipt." The judge straightened. "This is enough to dismiss the charges and arrest both Blackwood and Hawkins." Grace felt her knees go weak. "It is over." "Not quite." Judge Morrison's voice was cautious. "This proves the warrant was obtained through illegal means, but it does not prove you are innocent of the original charge. It simply means the warrant itself is invalid." "Then what happens?" "The trial proceeds, but without a valid warrant, the burden of proof shifts. The prosecution must prove you committed murder. You need only show reasonable doubt." Judge Morrison looked at Grace directly. "Did you kill your husband, Miss Thornton?" "No, Your Honor. He died of typhoid fever." "So did our son. Can you prove it?" "I have sent for witnesses. A doctor, a preacher, family members who were present. But I do not know if they will arrive in time." "Then you had better hope they do." Judge Morrison closed the ledger. "I will see you both in court on Friday, and I will be issuing arrest warrants for Victoria Blackwood and Marshal Hawkins. They will be taken into custody tonight." "Thank you, Your Honor." Cade shook his hand again. As they left the courthouse, Grace felt dizzy with relief. Victoria would be arrested, the conspiracy exposed. But the judge was right. The original charge still stood. Without witnesses from Missouri, she could still hang. "We won half the battle." Cade helped her onto her horse. "Now we need to win the other half. What if my witnesses do not come?" Cade met her eyes. "Then I will testify. I will tell the judge that I have watched you work, watched you care for my daughter, watched you risk your life for others. I will tell him that in my judgment you are incapable of murder, and I will stake my reputation on it. That might not be enough. It will have to be." They rode back toward Redemption in the afternoon light. Grace felt the weight of the coming trial like a stone in her chest. But beside the fear was something else. Gratitude. Hope. And a growing certainty that whatever happened, she would not face it alone. As they crested a rise, Grace saw a stagecoach on the road ahead, traveling toward Redemption. It was an unusual sight. The stage only ran twice a week, and this was not a scheduled day. "Wonder who that is," Cade muttered. They followed the stage into town. It stopped in front of the hotel. The door opened and a woman stepped out. She was perhaps 30, with dark hair and a determined set to her jaw. She looked around, clearly searching for someone. Grace's heart stopped. "Rachel!" The woman's head snapped toward Grace's voice. Her face broke into a smile. "Grace, thank God." Grace dismounted and ran to her sister-in-law. They embraced both women, crying. Rachel held Grace at arm's length and looked her over. "You look thin. Have they been feeding you? I have been working." Grace wiped her eyes. "Rachel, I cannot believe you came. Did you think I would not?" Rachel's voice was fierce. "After I got your letter, I packed immediately, and I brought help." The stage door opened again. An elderly man emerged carrying a black medical bag. He was perhaps 70, with white hair and kind eyes behind wire spectacles. "Dr. Morrison," Grace gasped. The doctor smiled. "Hello, Grace. I hear you need a witness." Behind him came another figure. Reverend Hayes, the preacher who had buried William and Samuel. He was a thin man with a gentle face and a Bible tucked under his arm. "Miss Grace." The Reverend nodded. "I have come to speak the truth." Grace could not speak. She simply stood there, overwhelmed. Cade appeared beside her and extended his hand to Rachel. "I am Cade Mercer. You must be Rachel Thornton." "I am." Rachel shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for protecting Grace. She protected herself. I just gave her a place to do it." Rachel studied him, her intelligent eyes missing nothing. Then she smiled slightly. "Grace wrote that you were a good man." I see she was correct. The trial was set for Friday morning. The courthouse in Redemption was too small, so Judge Morrison ordered it held in the church, the largest building in town. Grace spent Thursday night preparing. Rachel helped her press her clothes and pin up her hair. Dr. Morrison and Reverend Hayes went over their testimonies, making sure every detail was clear. Cade sat in on these preparations, listening intently, occasionally asking questions. Martha cooked a large dinner, and they all ate together around the kitchen table. Emma sat beside Grace, holding her hand under the table. The child had not left Grace's side since Rachel and the others arrived. "Are you scared?" Emma whispered. "A little." Grace squeezed her hand. "But I am also ready. What if they say you did something bad? Then your father and I will explain that I did not, and people will listen. But what if they do not listen?" Grace looked into Emma's worried eyes. "Then we will make them listen. Sometimes, sweetheart, you have to fight for the truth, even when it is hard, even when you are scared." Emma nodded solemnly. "I will fight too. I will tell them you are good. Thank you. But I hope you do not have to do that. This is grown-up business. You are my friend." Emma's voice was certain. Friends fight for each other. After Emma was put to bed, the adults gathered in Cade's office. Judge Morrison had sent word that Victoria Blackwood and Marshall Hawkins were both in custody, awaiting their own trials. But they would be present tomorrow to hear the case against Grace. "That will work in our favor," Rachel said. "The jury will see them in chains, will know they conspired against you. Or they will see them as victims of an overreaching judge." Cade leaned against his desk. "We cannot count on anything." "What is our strategy?" Dr. Morrison asked. "Truth." Cade looked at Grace. "We tell what happened. No embellishment, no drama, just the facts. William and Samuel got sick. Grace nursed them. They died despite her best efforts. People who were there can verify this." "And the reason she left Missouri?" Reverend Hayes asked. "Because she was accused, and no one would listen." Grace spoke up. "Because grief and loss made me want to disappear. Because I could not bear to stay in a place that held so many memories." "That is understandable." The Reverend nodded. "Anyone who has lost loved ones will sympathize." Rachel looked at Grace. "Are you prepared for them to ask about the arsenic?" Grace nodded. "I purchased arsenic 3 months before William died. It was for rats in the barn. The storekeeper who sold it to me is dead, but his ledgers still exist. They show multiple purchases by multiple people. It was common. And the inheritance?" Cade asked. $200 from the sale of our farm." Grace's voice was steady. "Hardly enough to kill for. And I can show where every penny went. supplies, survival, the stagecoach ticket to Texas. They talked late into the night, going over every possible question, every potential attack. When they finally dispersed, Grace returned to her room but could not sleep. She sat by her window and watched stars wheel overhead. A soft knock on her door. "Come in." Cade entered, still fully dressed. He closed the door behind him and stood awkwardly, as if unsure why he had come. "Could not sleep either?" Grace asked. "No." Cade moved to the window and stood beside her. "Tomorrow changes everything." "I know. If the verdict goes against you—" "Do not." Grace stopped him. "Do not think about that." "I have to." Cade turned to face her. "Grace, if they convict you, I will not let them hang you. You would be breaking the law. I do not care." His voice was fierce. "I have lost too much already. I will not lose you too." Grace stood and faced him. "Cade, no. Let me say this." Cade took her hands in his. "When you walked onto my ranch, I was dead inside, going through motions, raising Emma, but not really living. And then you came and everything changed." Emma smiles now. She laughs. She has hope. "And I—" His voice broke. "I have hope too. I am just a woman running from her past. You are the woman who made me want a future." Cade's gray eyes held hers. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know that. You matter. You are seen. You are valued." Grace felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I do not deserve this. I do not deserve you. You deserve everything." Cade reached up and gently wiped away her tears. "You deserve peace and safety and happiness. And if it takes me the rest of my life, I will make sure you have those things." Grace could not speak. She simply stepped forward and let Cade wrap his arms around her. They stood there in the darkness, holding each other, drawing strength from each other. And for those few stolen moments, Grace allowed herself to believe that everything might actually work out. Friday morning dawned cold and gray. Clouds hung low over the land, threatening rain. Grace dressed with Rachel's help. The gray dress, hair pinned severely back, no adornment except her mother's small silver cross. "You look perfect." Rachel squeezed her shoulders, strong, dignified, innocent. "I am terrified." "Good. Use that fear. Let it keep you sharp." They walked to the church together. Cade and Emma on one side, Rachel and the witnesses on the other. A crowd had already gathered. It seemed the entire county had turned out to watch. Inside, the church had been transformed into a courtroom. The altar served as the judge's bench. Chairs had been arranged in rows for spectators. A small table sat to one side for Grace and her witnesses. Another table faced it empty. That would be for the prosecution. Judge Morrison sat at the altar, his white hair bright against his black robes. He looked stern and impartial. Grace prayed he would also be just. Victoria Blackwood was led in wearing chains. Her once fine dress was wrinkled, her hair was coming loose from its pins, but her eyes burned with hatred as they found Grace. Beside her, Marshal Hawkins looked defeated, his shoulders slumped. The judge banged his gavel. "This court is now in session. We are here to hear the case of the State versus Grace Thornton, accused of the murder of William Thornton in Jefferson County, Missouri, in the year 1864. A murmur ran through the crowd. Grace felt Emma's small hand slip into hers. She squeezed gently. "Before we begin," Judge Morrison continued, "I must address a matter that has come to light. It appears the warrant for Miss Thornton's arrest was obtained through illegal means. I have evidence that Victoria Blackwood of this town conspired with a judge in Kansas City to fabricate or resurrect an old warrant for the purpose of persecution rather than prosecution." The crowd gasped. Victoria's face went red. "That is a lie." Silence. Judge Morrison's voice cracked like a whip. "Mrs. Blackwood, you will have your day in court. But today we are here to determine the truth about Grace Thornton. And we will do so based on facts, not fabrications." He turned to Grace. "Miss Thornton, how do you plead to the charge of murder?" Grace stood. Her voice was clear and steady. "Not guilty." Your Honor. Very well. Judge Morrison looked around the room. Who speaks for the prosecution? An uncomfortable silence. Then a man stood from the back. He was a lawyer from the county seat hired by someone to see this through. His name was Thomas Bradford, and he looked deeply unhappy with his assignment. I do, Your Honor, but I must state for the record that I have reviewed this case and find the evidence severely lacking. Nevertheless, the charge has been made and must be answered. Proceed with your case. Bradford called his first witness, a woman from Missouri who claimed to have known Grace. She testified that Grace and William had argued frequently that the marriage was unhappy, that Grace had been seen talking to another man. Rachel leaned close to Grace. Who is she? I have no idea. I have never seen her before in my life. When it was Grace's turn to cross-examine, Cade stood. Your Honor, may I question this witness? You are not a lawyer, Mr. Mercer. No, but I am a man who knows when he is hearing lies. Cade faced the woman. You say you knew Grace Thornton in Missouri? Yes. What town? Jefferson City. Grace never lived in Jefferson City. She lived in a homestead 15 miles outside of town. So how exactly did you know her? The woman faltered. I saw her in town sometimes. How often? Once or twice. And based on seeing her once or twice, you can testify to the state of her marriage. I heard things. From whom? The woman glanced toward Victoria. Just people. Cade leaned forward. How much were you paid to come here and lie? The crowd erupted. Judge Morrison banged his gavel. Order. Your Honor, this woman is a fraud. Cade's voice carried over the noise. She does not know Grace Thornton. She was paid to fabricate testimony, and I suspect I know by whom. The judge fixed the woman with a hard stare. Is this true? The woman crumbled. Yes. Mrs. Blackwood paid me $50 to come here and say those things. Another gasp from the crowd. Victoria stood, her face twisted with rage. That is a lie. I never— Sit down, Mrs. Blackwood. Judge Morrison's voice was ice. One more outburst and I will have you removed. The prosecution's case collapsed after that. Bradford called 2 more witnesses, but both were easily discredited. Grace almost felt sorry for the lawyer. He was trying to do his job with nothing but lies to work with. Then it was Grace's turn. Rachel stood first. State your name for the record. Rachel Thornton. I am the sister of William Thornton, Grace's late husband. You were present when William died. I was. Rachel's voice was strong. I lived 20 miles from their homestead. When William and young Samuel took sick, Grace sent word. I came immediately. What did you find? I found Grace exhausted beyond measure. She had been nursing them for 5 days without sleep. The doctor had been there twice. William was in the grip of typhoid fever. So was Samuel. Did Grace seem distressed? She was devastated. Rachel's voice softened. My brother was dying and she could not save him. It broke her. Did you observe her care for them every moment? She never left their sides. She tried every remedy the doctor suggested. She prayed constantly. She would have given her own life to save them if she could. And when they died, Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Grace held William as he took his last breath. She sang to Samuel until he stopped breathing. Then she collapsed. I thought we would lose her too. Thank you, Mrs. Thornton. Cade sat down. Dr. Morrison was next. He testified about the symptoms, the treatment, the inevitable progression of the disease. He produced his medical records, carefully preserved for 11 years, showing every visit, every prescription, every observation. There was no poisoning, he said firmly. This was typhoid fever, pure and simple. And Grace Thornton did everything humanly possible to save her family. Reverend Hayes followed. He spoke of Grace's character, her faith, her grief. He described the funeral, how Grace had stood beside 2 graves and seemed carved from stone, her pain too deep for tears. By the time the Reverend finished, half the women in the church were crying. Even some of the men looked moved. Finally, Grace herself took the stand. Judge Morrison looked at her kindly. Tell us what happened, Miss Thornton. In your own words. Grace took a breath. Then she spoke. She told of the happy years with William, the joy of Samuel's birth, the ordinary struggles of homestead life. Then the terrible week when fever came. I tried everything. Grace's voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. The doctor came. He gave us medicine. We tried cold baths to bring down the fever. We tried warm broths to keep up their strength. Nothing worked. What happened after they died, I buried them. Grace wiped her eyes. Then people started talking, saying I had killed them, saying I wanted the farm. But there was no farm, just 100 acres of hard ground and a cabin that held too many memories. I sold it for enough to survive, and I left. Why not stay and clear your name? Because no one would listen, because I was too broken to fight, because every day in that place was agony. And you came to Texas, I came to disappear, to find a place where no one knew me, where I could work and survive and maybe someday stop hurting so much. Did you murder your husband, Miss Thornton? Grace looked directly at the judge. No, Your Honor. I loved William with all my heart, and I would give anything, absolutely anything, to have him and Samuel back. Silence filled the church. Then Judge Morrison said, "You may step down." The judge took a recess to consider his verdict. Grace stood outside the church surrounded by her people. Rachel held one hand. Emma held the other. Cade stood behind her, a solid presence. "Whatever happens," Rachel said, "you told the truth. That matters. The truth does not always win. It did today." Cade's voice was certain. "I saw the judge's face. He believes you." After an hour they were called back inside. Judge Morrison sat at the altar, his expression unreadable. The crowd held its breath. "I have considered all the evidence." His voice filled the church. "I have heard testimony from credible witnesses. I have reviewed medical records and legal documents, and I have listened to the accused speak in her own defense." He paused. Grace felt Emma's hand tighten on hers. The original charge of murder was based on rumor and speculation. The warrant was obtained through illegal means. The prosecution's witnesses were proven to be frauds. Meanwhile, the defense has provided overwhelming evidence that William Thornton died of natural causes, specifically typhoid fever, and that Grace Thornton did everything possible to save him. Judge Morrison looked directly at Grace. "Therefore, I find the defendant not guilty of all charges. She is free to go." The church erupted. People cheered. Rachel sobbed. Emma threw her arms around Grace's waist. And Cade, dignified Cade who never showed emotion, pulled Grace into his arms and held her as if he would never let go. Victoria Blackwood screamed, "This is wrong. She is guilty. She must be punished. The only person being punished today is you, Mrs. Blackwood." Judge Morrison's voice was steel. "You fabricated evidence. You bribed witnesses. You conspired to pervert justice. I am remanding you and Marshall Hawkins to the county jail to await trial for conspiracy fraud and attempted kidnapping. And I am recommending you both receive the maximum sentence the law allows." Guards led Victoria away, still screaming. Marshall Hawkins went quietly defeated. Grace watched them go and felt not triumph, but sadness. Two people had destroyed themselves through greed and jealousy. Outside, the celebration continued. Rebecca Foster hugged Grace. The townspeople who had doubted her now came forward to apologize. Daniel and his father shook Cade's hand. Dr. Morrison and Reverend Hayes prepared to return to Missouri, satisfied that justice had been served. Rachel pulled Grace aside. "So, what now, I do not know." Grace looked toward Cade, who was talking with Emma. "I suppose I keep working at the ranch." Rachel smiled. "Just working?" Grace blushed. "I do not know what you mean." "You love him. It is written all over your face. It does not matter. He may not feel the same." "Grace," Rachel took her hands, "I watched him in that courtroom, the way he fought for you, the way he looked at you. That man loves you. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Before Grace could answer, Cade approached. "Miss Rachel, would you mind taking Emma for a few minutes? I need to speak with Grace privately." "Of course." Rachel took Emma's hand. "Come on, sweetheart. Let us go look at the pretty windows in the church." When they were alone, Cade took Grace's hand and led her away from the crowd. They walked to the edge of town to a small rise that overlooked the valley. The sun was breaking through the clouds, turning the landscape gold. Cade was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "You are free now. Free to go anywhere, do anything. You could return to Missouri, start fresh somewhere else. No one would blame you if you wanted to leave this place and all its bad memories behind. Is that what you want?" "For me to leave, no." The word was fierce. "But it is not about what I want. It is about what you deserve." "What do you think I deserve, Cade?" He turned to face her, taking both her hands. "You deserve a life without fear, without accusations, without having to constantly prove your worth. You deserve peace. I have peace. Here, with you and Emma." "Grace," his voice was rough, "I need to say something and I need you to let me finish before you respond." "All right." Cade took a breath. "When Sarah died, I thought I was done. I thought the best parts of my life were over. I would raise Emma, run the ranch, and that would be enough. I told myself I did not need anything more, could not handle anything more. Then you appeared, stubborn, fierce, broken, but refusing to stay broken. You marched onto my property and demanded work. You faced down hired guns and corrupt marshals and the most vicious gossip this town has ever seen. You saved my daughter. You made her smile again. You made me feel again." He stepped closer. "I know you have been through hell. I know trusting anyone is terrifying after what you have endured. But Grace, I am asking anyway, stay, not as an employee, stay as my wife, help me raise Emma, build a life here, let me spend every day proving that you made the right choice." Grace felt tears streaming down her face. "I have nothing to offer you, no money, no land, no status, just myself, just yourself is everything." Cade reached into his pocket and pulled out a small gold ring. It was simple, unadorned, clearly well worn. "This was Sarah's ring. She asked me before she died to find someone who would love Emma as much as she did, someone who would make our family whole again. I think she meant you. Cade, I am terrified. So am I. But I am more terrified of waking up one day and realizing I let you walk away." Grace looked at the ring, then at Cade's face. She thought of William, her first love, the father of her child. She thought of the grief and guilt she had carried for 4 years, and she realized that William would want this for her. He would want her to live, to love, to be happy. "Yes." The word came out as a whisper. "Yes, I will marry you." Cade's face transformed. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms and kissed her. It was not their first kiss, but it felt like a beginning, like everything before had been prologue, and now finally the real story was starting. When they broke apart, Grace said, "There is something you should know. What I am broken in ways that may never fully heal. I still dream of William and Samuel. I still wake up sometimes thinking they are alive. I may always carry that grief." "Good." Cade touched her face gently. "Because I am broken too, and maybe 2 broken people can hold each other up better than 2 whole ones ever could." They walked back to town hand in hand. Emma saw them coming and started running. She threw herself at them both, her small arms trying to encompass them. "Does this mean Grace is staying forever?" "Yes, sweetheart." Cade lifted his daughter into his arms. "We are getting married." Emma's face split into a grin. "Will she be my new mama?" "If you will have me." Grace stroked Emma's hair. Emma wrapped her arms around Grace's neck. "I prayed for a mama. I did not think God was listening, but He was. He was sweetheart." Grace felt her heart closed and guarded for so long finally opening fully. He was listening the whole time. In the weeks that followed, Victoria Blackwood and Marshall Hawkins stood trial for conspiracy fraud and attempted kidnapping. Judge Morrison presided. The evidence was overwhelming. Victoria received 5 years in prison. Hawkins received 3 years and permanent dismissal from law enforcement. Kane and his men never returned. Without Victoria's money, they had no reason to stay. Word spread that Kane had been seen heading toward New Mexico, still limping from an old injury. Grace settled into life at the ranch with the easy confidence of someone who had finally found where she belonged. She worked beside Martha, taught Emma to read, and rode the property with Cade, learning every corner of the land that would be hers. And one evening, As they watched the sunset from the porch, Cade asked her to marry him, properly this time, with Emma's blessing and a ring that fit. The wedding took place a month later. It was a simple ceremony in the same church where Grace had been tried and acquitted. Reverend Hayes, who had stayed on for a few weeks to help rebuild his Missouri congregation, performed the service. Rachel stood as Grace's witness. Silas stood for Cade. Emma insisted on being the flower girl. She took her role very seriously, walking down the aisle with grave dignity, scattering petals from Martha's garden. When she reached the front, she stood between Grace and Cade, holding both their hands. The entire town attended. Rebecca Foster cried through the whole ceremony. Daniel and his father sat in the front row. Even Judge Morrison, who had developed a fondness for the case that had tested his wisdom, made the journey from Anderson. "Do you, Cade Mercer, take Grace Thornton to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Reverend Hayes's voice was warm. "I do." Cade's eyes never left Grace's face. "From this day until my last day." "And do you, Grace Thornton, take Cade Mercer to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Grace looked at Cade, at Emma, at the community gathered to witness this moment. She thought of all the roads that had led her here. The grief and loss, the fear and flight, the desperate hope that somewhere, somehow, she might find a place to belong. "I do." Her voice rang clear. "I do with all my heart." Reverend Hayes smiled. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Cade kissed Grace gently, reverently. The church erupted in applause. Emma hugged them both. And Grace felt for the first time in 4 years completely and utterly home. The reception was held at the ranch. Long tables were set up in the yard. Martha and Rebecca had cooked enough food to feed the entire county. Fiddlers played. Children danced. The sun set in a blaze of red and gold, painting the sky like a benediction. As darkness fell, lanterns were lit. Grace stood on the porch of what was now her home and watched the celebration. Cade appeared beside her, 2 cups of cider in his hands. He offered her one. Happy Grace took the cup and smiled. "More than I ever thought possible." They stood in comfortable silence, watching their guests. Then Cade said, "I have something for you." He pulled out a folded paper. Grace opened it to find a land deed. Her eyes widened. "What is this, half the ranch?" Cade's voice was firm. "We are partners in everything now. This is your home as much as mine." "Cade, I cannot accept this. It is too much. It is not enough." He took her hand. "You have given me back my life. The least I can do is give you legal claim to yours." Grace looked at the deed, at this man who had stood by her when everyone else condemned her, who had fought for her freedom, who had offered her not just love but equality. She folded the deed carefully and tucked it into her dress. "Thank you." Her voice was thick with emotion. Emma ran up onto the porch, breathless from dancing. "Mama, Papa, come dance with me. Mama." The word still sent a thrill through Grace every time Emma said it. "We will be right there." Emma grabbed their hands and pulled them toward the music. Grace let herself be led. She let herself laugh. She let herself dance under the Texas stars with her husband and her daughter and the community that had become her family. Later, much later, after the guests had gone and Emma was asleep and the ranch was quiet, Grace stood at her bedroom window. Their bedroom window. She looked out at the land that was now hers, at the life she had built from ruins. Cade appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" Grace leaned back against him. "I am thinking about second chances, about how sometimes you have to lose everything before you can find what really matters. And what really matters? This." Grace turned in his arms. "You, Emma. This family we are building, this life we are choosing every day." Cade kissed her forehead. "No more running, no more running." Grace smiled. "I am done running, Cade. I am home." They stood together at the window, watching the stars wheel overhead. The same stars that had witnessed Grace's grief and flight now witnessed her healing and her hope. And in the darkness of the Texas night, 2 broken people held each other and believed finally in tomorrow. Years later, people would tell the story of Grace Mercer, the woman who came to redemption with nothing and stayed to build an empire. They would talk about her strength, her courage, her refusal to be defeated. They would tell their daughters to be like Grace, to stand tall in the face of accusations, to fight for truth even when the world was against them. But Grace herself never thought of herself as remarkable. She was simply a woman who had survived grief and found love again. A woman who had learned that home was not a place but the people who stood beside you when everything fell apart. And every night before she closed her eyes, Grace whispered a prayer of gratitude. For Cade, who had given her safety and partnership. For Emma, who had given her purpose and joy. For the harsh and beautiful land of Texas, which had given her a place to belong. She had come to Texas to disappear. Instead, she had found herself, and that Grace thought was the greatest gift of all. The story of Grace Thornton, who became Grace Mercer, was not a story of rescue. It was a story of redemption. Not just hers, but Cade's and Emma's, and even the town's. Because sometimes the person you save ends up saving you right back. And sometimes, when you have lost everything, you discover that everything you truly need has been waiting for you all along. You just have to be brave enough to reach out and take it. Grace Mercer lived to be 83 years old. She saw her ranch grow into one of the most prosperous in Texas. She raised Emma and watched her become a strong, confident woman who carried on her mother's legacy of courage. She had 3 more children with Cade, filling the house with laughter and life. And every year, on the anniversary of William and Samuel's deaths, she laid flowers on a small memorial she had built on the ranch. She never forgot her first family, but she had learned that the heart is infinite, that love does not diminish when shared, that you can honor the past while embracing the future. When Grace died, the entire county came to her funeral. Judge Morrison, ancient and white-haired, delivered the eulogy. He spoke of a woman who had faced injustice and emerged victorious. A woman who had turned accusations into advocacy, creating a network that helped other women facing false charges. A woman who had transformed a ranch into a refuge. But Emma, now a grown woman with children of her own, had the last word. She stood before the assembled mourners and said simply, "My mother taught me that strength is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to act despite the fear. She taught me that family is built on love and loyalty, not blood. And she taught me that no matter how dark the night, dawn always comes if you are brave enough to wait for it." Grace would have liked that, because in the end, that was what her story had always been about, waiting for dawn. And when it came, having the courage to step into the light.